Hi, this is Debbie Pate. We're going to get started today on going over the legal and ethical issues in nursing. We'll first look at the different considerations for nursing ethics: autonomy, veracity, role fidelity, beneficence, non-maleficence, confidentiality, and justice. So just to give you a short definition of each of those, autonomy is the freedom to choose and make one's own decisions regarding health care without any kind of coercion. An example of this is an informed consent. The nurse respects the refusal to consent to surgery or treatment if the patient so chooses. Veracity is the principle of truth-telling. This is that reciprocal relationship between the healthcare provider or practitioner and the patient. It's based on the idea that the practitioner and the patient's relationship is best served in an atmosphere of truth. An example is the expectation that the patient will give a truthful health history and the nurse will be truthful with the patient within the health care system's limits on what a nurse can tell the patient. Role fidelity is described as practicing faithfully within the boundaries of the nurse's role as defined by the state law and regulations. An example of this is the nurse takes care to honor his or her commitments and promises to patients while considering the ethical mandates of the nursing profession. Beneficence emphasizes doing or promoting good and preventing or removing harm. This is often thought of as the most critical ethical principle. It is our duty to promote the health and welfare of a patient while honoring the personal autonomy. Example of this would be following the nursing process to develop a plan of care and agreed upon by the nurse and the patient. We're almost through. We're going to go through maleficence. It's doing no harm and is stated in the terms of negative actions. The non-maleficence is the foundation of the Hippocratic Oath of the medical profession. An example of a violation is a nurse who intentionally administers a lethal dose of medication. Confidentiality is a legal and ethical term and refers to the protection of the private health information gathered during the provision of health care services. The nurse must safeguard a patient's right to privacy. An example of this is the nurse who refuses to discuss a patient's condition in the elevator with a coworker. Last but not least is justice, and this is concerned with the concepts of fairness, rewards, and entitlements. In healthcare, it asks the questions: who should be entitled to and receive health care? This is one of the most important principles of today, as the U.S. grapples with the decision and with the dilemma of who has the right to health care. Ethics and culture. Culturally competent nursing care is the integration of knowledge, attitudes, and skills. The more insight nurses have into their own values, attitudes, beliefs, and practices, the more they are prepared to overcome just prejudices, discrimination, judgmentalness, preconceived concepts, and involves evaluating personal health-related issues, attitudes, beliefs, and practices. Moral development refers to how an individual learns to handle moral dilemma. For example, an ethical dilemma can exist in issues involving patients, self-determination, patient rights, withholding and withdrawing life support, and the allocation of health care resources, loyalty, and truth. Decision-making, especially in healthcare, is rarely either black and white or white. I want you to think about a time when you encountered a situation such as this, and it presented you with an ethical dilemma. You might have struggled with whether to report a physician or an impaired coworker. How did you arrive at your decided course of action? How did you feel about your actions? Were there any alternatives? What happened to the individual, and how did you decide whose rights to protect? The Code of Ethics for Nurses provides a framework for ethical analysis and decision-making. It's non-negotiable, and is applicable to all practice settings and a variety of nursing roles. Look in page 1101 and 1102 of your Wilkinson book, and it's going to go through this 8-step decision-making process that we're going to review right now. 8-step models: gathering relevant information. You're going to identify and gather that, and then this information should consist of factual elements of the ethical dilemma, and it should be concisely and completely stated. In step 2, the practical problem will be identified, and the problem will be stated in terms of the decisions that must be made in order to take action. The focus here on what specific action should be taken is on that rather than the justification of a specific course of action. Step 3, just as it says, involves identifying a variety of ethical issues and ethical questions. Step 4, the ethical principles and frameworks needed to consider as these become the basis of the argument for taking a particular action or a position, whether something is right or wrong. And step 5, we need to formulate possible answers and justify it using the principles and through theoretical perspectives selected. So then step 6 is one or more counter-arguments, challenges the assumptions of that argument. And step 7, options to be explored. Step 8, we're going to select, complete, and evaluate the options. So as your book talks about it on page 1103, they use the acronym MORAL mode. Moral meaning M, massage the dilemma, O for the outline, R for resolve, A for act by applying the chosen action, and L, look back and evaluate. The next couple of slides, it's kind of taken from your book there, and it talks about Bridget, and I'll let you just read over that and kind of see that dilemma that they were in. She'd been working in this community clinic for over 2 years, and her friend Susie was the nurse practitioner at the clinic, and there seemed to be some issues going on there, and it was an ethical dilemma. So read over that and kind of come to your own conclusion on that using that moral dilemma. But in doing that, you're going to find that there's several things that you'll bring forward. Your own personal beliefs about right and wrong, and then what is held accountable as a nurse. What are you going to do with this information? Next, we're going to look at the issues in law, and we have a couple more slides, so I want to keep going with this. Sources of law are your common law. That generally arises from the trials where actions are brought mainly to recover monetary damages. This can change frequently because this is more of a judge-made or a court-made law, and it could change from time to time. Common law generally arises from trials where an action is brought mainly to recover monetary damages, and decisions can be overturned, upheld, or modified. And like I said, it changes frequently. Administrative laws is by the operations of government. Congress delegates certain agencies the duty to oversee federal and state governments. An example of administrative law is like the Centers of Medicare or the National Labor Relations Board. Statutory laws consist of constitutional laws, federal law, and it takes precedence over the laws of the states and jurisdictions. And like it says there, an example is like the U.S. Constitution. We'll continue to go on. Issues in law are legal principles, justice, confidentiality, and the right to privacy, patients' rights, informed consent, assault and battery. In justice, it's upholding moral, legal, and human principles, treating others fairly regardless of their race, age, citizenship, or the economic status. This value is reflected in professional practice when the nurse works to ensure equal treatment under the law and equal access to quality health care. Confidentiality and the right to privacy is by acronym called HIPAA. Civil and criminal penalties can result from failure to comply with requirements to HIPAA, but mandatory reporting requirements is one exception. That being such as child abuse or neglect, communicable diseases. Patients' rights are guaranteed by the Constitution, including freedom of speech, religion, right to not be discriminated against due to race, creed, or color. Hospitals have a Patient's Bill of Rights, and you can see that on page 1100, box 44-4. These are not legal binding, but violations of these can jeopardize funding by Medicare and Medicaid, and non-compliance can cause organizations to lose accreditation by the Joint Commission. Informed consent is next, and the patient has the right to be freed from unwanted medical treatment and has the right to know the potential risk, benefits, alternatives, and the patient must fully understand what he or she has consented to. The signed consent is not valid if the patient does not understand what he or she has consented to. The Patient Self-Determination Act made advancements for patients to make decisions concerning his or her own health care. Assault and battery is a deliberate threat to physical harm. Two conditions that must be met. The offender must have the ability to commit the battery, and the person must be aware of the immediate threat and must be fearful of it. Battery is the actual and intentional act of touching another without the person's consent. An example of this would be the nurse tells the patient, if you don't take these pills, I'll have to give you your medication IV. That's an assault. And then giving the medication IV without the patient's consent is considered battery. Examples for an invasion of privacy would be exposed body in the room or corridors, release of information to unauthorized persons, if you're gossiping about a client in the hallways, unwanted intrusion into private family matters. Exceptions of this, which we've already talked about, are like reporting communicable diseases or child abuse is suspected. Informed consent, what should it include? The nature and purpose of the proposed treatment or procedure, the risk and benefits of a proposed treatment or procedure, alternatives regardless of their cost or the extent to which treatment are covered by the health insurance, risk and benefits of the alternative treatment or procedure, and the risk and benefits of not receiving or undergoing treatment. Assault and battery. Assault, we kind of went over it a while ago, but let's go over it one more time. Assault is any willful attempt or threat to harm another without the ability to actually harm that person. And battery is the intentional touching of another person's body or anything the person is touching or holding without consent. Injury is not a requirement. So then we come down to the nursing liability. Think about how the following situations could place you as the RN at risk for malpractice or negligence. A physician's orders, inadequate staffing, misuse, abuse of controlled substances, or floating to an unfamiliar unit. These are just some tips that you might want to take to heart to remember in ways to avoid any kind of liability. You want to make a favorable first impression. We want to establish your baseline, meaning know your patient. Be aware of your own strengths and weaknesses. Delegate carefully and legally. That's the difference between an LPN and an RN. I know many of you have been posting about that, about the buck stops here. But the LPN doesn't have as much legal responsibility as the RN. Carry out orders cautiously. Administer drugs carefully and maintain rapport with the patient. The next slide I think is very important. Whoops, sorry, that's not what I want. This is the one I wanted. Think before you speak. Document accurately. If it wasn't documented, it wasn't done. Exercise caution when assisting in procedures. Document use of restraint. Take steps to prevent patient falls and comply with laws about advance directives. Adhere to facility policies and keep up to date in changes in policies and provide a safe environment. Issues in law. Medical malpractice is professional misconduct. Failure to perform professional duties or failure to meet the professional standards of care that results in harm to another. We're going to go over these. Intentional torts include assault and battery, false imprisonment, defamation of character, fraud, invasion of privacy, and infliction of mental or emotional distress. Negligent torts include malfeasance, misfeasance, and nonfeasance. So those are negligent torts. Examples of actions that could result in malpractice are failure to obtain informed consent, which would be negligence, threatening a patient, which would be assault, forcing a patient to take a medication, which is battery, confining a patient on a locked psychiatric unit without a physician's order is false imprisonment, taking a picture of a patient without his consent is invasion of privacy, and making false statements about a patient that causes damage to the patient's reputation is considered slander. Malpractice, there needs to be 4 elements present for a person to recover damages suffered as a result of a negligent act. The 4 things are duty of care, breach of duty, and injury and causation. Malpractice lawsuits, they are a type of negligence, has to have happened. Patient must prove all 4 of those elements: duty, breach of standard of care, direct cause, and damages. Do you think we as nurses need malpractice insurance? That's something for you to, that's just a rhetorical question. I want you to think about that and give me your thoughts on that when we see each other the next time. So, as a student nurse, what do you think your responsibilities are? Well, basically, you're held to the same standard as a licensed nurse. Prepare carefully for clinical practices. You want to never attempt a procedure or make judgment about which you feel unsure, and you're always going to have your instructor or a staff nurse. You're going to notify them if anything changes with your patient. Unless otherwise arranged, you're going to take instructions only from your clinical instructor. So you're going to look on page 1130 in Wilkinson to see more of that. Negligence is the conduct that falls below the standard of care. You don't perform to accepted standards, and you perform duties carelessly and thoughtlessly, and do not give enough attention to them. When we keep going with this, there's different kinds of negligence. There can be a tort, a civil wrong committed against a person or property that results in harm. Unintentional is by omission of a fact, a negligence or malpractice. And intentional would be like an assault, battery, or any kind of willful act. Unintentional torts are negligence. And there's 3 forms, and they're malfeasance, which is the act of performing an unlawful or an improper act. Misfeasance is an improper performance of an act. And nonfeasance is failure to act where duty exists as a reasonably prudent person would act. Malfeasance is the act of performing an unlawful or an improper act. Misfeasance is the improper performance of an act. And nonfeasance is the failure to act where a duty exists as a reasonable, prudent nurse would have acted. So, we keep going here with healthcare trends affecting our patients. Access to healthcare, quality of healthcare, technology, inpatient acuity levels are increasing. We're having quicker discharges from the hospital due to insurance demanding the DRGs. aging population, increasing chronic illnesses, and nursing shortage and consumer demands. So you can see there's many things that have changed in our healthcare settings. Some of the documentation issues, remember, if it's not written or charted, it's not done. It goes over this in your book very, very explicitly. Chart the interventions. Clarify your instructions, teachings, discharge planning. Document that the patient verbalizes understanding if they have in fact verbalized it. So I want you to remember, you need to record observations as facts, not conclusions. You want to describe behaviors in detail instead of labeling actions. No judgments. You can't make judgments on patients. If making amendments, use the facility policy. And you also want a time, date, signature with your title, every entry. Incidents reports are basically just internal reports. They don't belong on the charts. You don't chart that incident report completed. It's an internal report that's used where there's an occurrence out of the normal practice, meaning that something out of the ordinary happened. We need to let our case manager, we need to let our risk manager know that they can come investigate. Time limits on when they should be completed. They're submitted to the risk management and not to be used as punishment. Now, this ends up with just definitions, and I'm going to refer you to your book to 1111, page 1111 in the Wilkinson book on advanced directives, living wills, healthcare surrogate, durable power of attorney, and do not resuscitate orders. So I want you to look those definitions up on your own and know that you're going to be asked questions on these for the next test about advanced directives, living wills, healthcare surrogate, durable power of attorney, and do not resuscitate. That's just a little heads up that you want to make sure that you understand all of those, all 6 of those, and you know the differences between all of them. All right, that's the end of this session, so I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.